Welcome back to the series. This is episode 3 about the Waldensians and their disappearance into the Hussite movement. This means that this episode will not be about the Hussites, it'll just be about the Waldensians and how they were absorbed into the Hussite movement, their relations with the Hussites, the Taborites specifically. So, as we talked about in the very exhaustive episode 2 of this series, the poor of Lyon were very widespread, and one of the places that they had gone to was Bohemia. They were able to league up with the Hussites, but they weren't quite friendly at first. I think Jan Hus wasn't exactly very keen on women preaching, which had kind of died at this point, but maybe it was still part of their culture to some degree. Not to mention, Jan Hus was a bit apprehensive to laymen even preaching at all. But in the 1410s, when Jan Hus had gone into exile and he was in southern Bohemia, he did report that he was sort of changing his mind on that subject, and he really appreciated the lay people who were preaching there, which is probably in reference to the poor of Lyon he met in those regions, and means that he finally was able to reconcile his movement with theirs, and they could finally have a common target, which would be the Catholic Church, and one common goal, which would be to preach the true gospel according to them to the world. There was even one of Jan Hus's colleagues named Jacobellus of Strebro, who was the successor of Jan Hus to the Bethlehem Chapel, which was where he began his preaching and eventually was kicked out of. That colleague, Jacobellus, had good things to say about the Waldensians, and he said that they were persecuted for the gospel, not for any of their own errors. Because of this sort of cooperation, the poor of Lyon were actually able to be involved in academic settings like the Black Rose University House. There was a schism in the Hussite movement, which gave moderates and radicals. The radicals, though, were the ones that the poor of Lyon were most united with, because the radical Hussites themselves actually wanted to unite all of the brethren, the poor of Lyon, in Germany and Bohemia. And by 1419, the poor of Lyon had finally been completely immersed into the Taborite movement, which was changing from a pacifistic movement to a warlike movement because it was so radical. They had sent an army under their general named Procope, who had gone so far as Nuremberg in Germany on invasions. This also does not mean that the Waldensians would not have some kind of identity going on. They still would have seen themselves maybe as a bit set apart from their Taborite uh, hosts, to say, but they were definitely still working together enough that they were united. The unification of the two seems to have been from the impetus of a certain Friedrich Reiser, who was a itinerant preacher for the poor of Lyon. He went to the Taborites himself to try to make a partnership with them, whether that was as a delegation from his movement or whether he decided to do it himself. We don't know, but I suspect the former, actually. In 1431, there was a conference in Krakow between some Hussites, delegates from the University of Prague, Prokop, the Taborite general, Peter Payne, who was a Lollard inspiree, and Friedrich Reiser, the poor of Lyon. And in the same year, Friedrich Reiser, the poor of Lyon, was ordained a Taborite bishop. So he served the Taborites, but he also kept contact with his brethren even in the Alps. And in 1432, we have records that the Dauphine brothers, in one of their meetings, had sent money to the Hussites to sponsor their movement. As for some of the next events that happened, Reiser, Prokop, and Payne met again at the Council of Basel in 1432. The Taborites were then declared heretics, and they were promptly defeated in May 1434 at the Battle of Lipany, and there was peace signed in 1436 with the recognition of a moderate Hussite church. So the Taborites had to become peaceful and they had to negotiate, which is sort of the poor of Lyon mindset, which was never really that warlike from the beginning. In 1450, Reiser and some of the bishops of the Taborites had made plans to make missions into Germany every 3 years. They did Engelsdorf 1453, Zatek in 56, Strasbourg 59, but Reiser was finally arrested by the Inquisition of Strasbourg in 1458 after being tortured, and he was executed. That city was a place where a lot of poor of Lyon had died in the past and tortured when they first began their preaching. In 1457, the Unity of Czech Brethren was created, which was, according to Gabriel Adisio's book, radical Hussites with Taborite sympathies but who deliberately renounced all uses of violence. The Unity of Brethren did not like the apostolic succession from the Catholic Church that the moderate Utraquist Church of the Hussites had adopted. So they made their own priests, which the Utraquists did not. Don't forget that the Utraquists were supposed to be a compromise that allowed a moderate, sort of separatist church that had apostolic succession from the Catholic one, which did allow the faithful to receive the blood of Christ into the accidents of wine. And this is the end of the history of the poor of Lyon in the Czech lands that are now fully involved with the Hussites and the Taborites, mostly the Taborites, and they'll do their own thing, while the poor of Lyon will still exist in Germany, Italy, especially in Apulia and Calabria, the Dauphiné, and Piedmont. So that's the end of episode 3. Episode 4 will be the end about the Reformation. This was a quick episode, just a quick look at the Bohemian brothers, but now it'll be time to talk about the full-on end of the Poor of Lyon as we know it. They still exist today, but they're not the same thing exactly. So until then, goodbye.